For as long as man has kept sheep, he has relied upon a very special partnership to help him master his stock. The teamwork of shepherd and dog stretches back hundreds of years, but the ancient instincts behind successful sheep herding go back much, much further. Thousands of years ago, this dog's ancestors were predators, wolves for whom animals such as sheep would be easy prey. However, centuries of evolution, selective breeding, and careful training have transformed the hunter into a herder. Man has been able to harness the very impulses that would at one time have posed a serious threat to livestock, resulting in the single-minded genius of sheep herding that is today's working border collie. The Border Collie's ability to control stock is legendary. He is the ideal farm dog, intelligent, eager to please, extremely trainable, and possessed of limitless energy. This is a breed born to work. And to deprive such an animal of its role can destroy its spirit. Throughout the sheepdog's life, the desire to serve his master remains as strong as ever. Borough Farm, situated on the exposed coast of North Devon, is home to David and his family. Facing the open Atlantic and located on the edge of Exmoor, it is an area of outstanding beauty, with the gently wooded Borough Valley running down to the sheltered cove of Lee Bay. The open farmland is dominated by stone-faced Devon banks, which play a vital role providing a natural habitat for the abundance of wildlife that exists alongside the farming environment. When these walls were built over 200 years ago, labor on the land was cheap. A large flock of sheep would have numbered 150, and a farm of 100 acres would have employed half a dozen men. But times change, and it now takes a flock of 900 breeding ewes to support one farming family. Agricultural working practices have altered too. Modern economics mean that rather than retaining a ready supply of full-time labor, help can only be hired in at the busiest times of the year. That is to say, help of the two-legged kind. For today's shepherd now relies more than ever on the hard work and devotion of his year-long companion, the working sheepdog. David has been shepherding for 15 years and relies totally on his team of working dogs to help overcome the challenges of the farming year. Each collie is an individual with its own strengths and weaknesses. The shepherd's intimate knowledge of his dog's varying characters and abilities means that the right one will always be chosen for the particular job in hand. At 6½, Greg is the oldest dog on the team. Over the past 5 years, his hard work and intelligence have made him invaluable. Here, Greg comes across a ewe which has become cast or stranded on its back. It's a common problem which more usually occurs in the late spring before the ewes are shorn. On hot days, the sheep try to rub their itching backs by rolling, but unfortunately a fat ewe can soon become stuck. It's a dangerous situation, which could result in the death of the animal through bloat or leave it vulnerable to attack from opportunist birds. Greg's reaction to the stricken ewe attracts David's attention. And with minimal effort, the sheep is sent away none the worse for her ordeal. Greg's working partner for the past 4 years has been Swift, When working, their individual skills as a brace complement each other, making an effective team. Swift is David's constant companion, not just because she's always on hand to sort out any situations, but also because she's determined not to be left behind. Swift is a completely different style of working dog. Much quicker to respond to commands, she is what's known as strong-eyed, meaning that she is completely focused on her sheep. She is very controllable when working and totally dependable in delicate situations. However, Swift is not as free-working as Greg and requires much more in the way of commands from David. Of the younger members of the team, Gail is just 12 months old, but coming on well. Being the daughter of Greg and Swift, she shows positive elements inherited from both parents. From Swift, her temperament and strength when working close to sheep, and from Greg, a good outrun and the ability to work freely, not totally reliant on commands from her handler. As a youngster, there is some way to go yet. Gail still makes plenty of errors. Watching the sheep instead of casting around them is considered a major mistake. And cutting in and taking off a single sheep could cause chaos in some situations. 15-minute training sessions are taken whenever possible, along with the invaluable experience of daily work. Pip, at 3, is a useful part of the working team, but in any pack of dogs, there's a pecking order, and Pip is struggling to maintain a superior position to Gail, the more dominant character. The shepherd's year begins in early autumn, when the flock of breeding ewes is selected. Feet are trimmed, and wool from around the back end is removed to avoid it becoming soiled over the winter months. Then it's off to fresh grazing, to ensure the ewes are in tip-top condition for the introduction of the rams in early October. The rams too are prepared for the tupping season. Coloured marker rattles are fitted so as to identify which ewes have been served. Loading the selected rams into the trailer requires determination and more than a little bravery. A ram can be an erratic and aggressive customer.
Greg, come here. Greg, come here. Greg, come here. Greg. Greg.
Their destination, only a mile away from Borough Farm, is the Mort Point Peninsula, a paradise for a unique blend of wildlife. Rented for grazing from the National Trust, which owns and maintains the area, this breathtakingly scenic rocky outcrop protrudes into the Atlantic Ocean. The rough grassland is home to a further 250 breeding ewes, which graze amongst its rock and gorse. The property is managed by the National Trust to ensure maximum benefit to the wild coastal environment. Local wardens, Philip and Rob, are currently busy stone walling on the point, an ancient skill still in use today.
Out you go.
Here, the autumn colours are very much in evidence as the rams are driven down the steep bank to join the ewes.
Stop.
The excitement generated by the arrival of the menfolk means that the shepherd's year is underway. A quieter moment allows an opportunity for the latest recruit to Borough Farm to be introduced to sheep for the first time. Fern is just 4 months old and arrived on the farm as a 3-month-old pup. She comes from an illustrious line of outstanding working dogs, and David has great hopes that she will prove to be as exceptional as her parents and grandparents. As with most young pups, Fern's initial reaction is to give chase, even pulling at some wool in the sheep's sides. For just a second, though, there's a hint of the style she has inherited from her forebears, an encouraging indication of future potential. But for now, Fern must be kept away from the ewes until she's mature enough to start to learn her trade. By the middle of January, some of the flocks are midway through their pregnancies, and sheep are gathered in from the wintering fields in preparation for scanning. This piece of modern technology is used to determine how many lambs each ewe is carrying, so enabling the shepherds to house those expecting 2 or 3 offsprings and feed them according to their additional requirements, so the lambs are born strong and healthy. Scanning is a highly skilled job. Michael will work his way through 100,000 sheep in a few short winter months. From a blurred image on a screen, he can diagnose the number of lambs carried by each ewe with a near 100% success rate. It's a relatively rapid procedure, ensuring the animals suffer minimal stress, and this afternoon scanning of 450 ewes is completed in a little over 3 hours.
Stop.
Today, there's an extra customer for the scanner. After a long trip to be mated to a much-admired hill dog, it is hoped that Swift will be in pup.
One. She's in pup.
2, 3.
David is relieved to find out that all has gone to plan, and that February will see not only the first lambs of the year, but also the arrival of a new litter of pups.
Thank goodness for that. Ah, well done, Swift.
A bit difficult to count anyone. That's not this with that.
But we're definitely in pup.
Yeah, definitely. Definitely.
With the short winter days, the grass stops growing, and the feeding of the now heavily pregnant ewe flock occupies a good deal of time for shepherd and dogs. Sheep nuts are provided to give the ewes all the nutrition they need to produce strong, healthy lambs. Feeding times are eagerly awaited, so much so that far from being wary of the shepherd, the flock will readily mob anyone who dares to carry a plastic bag into the field. Today, Greg and Pip's role is to stop the sheep from trying to get through the gate before all the feed has been poured into troughs.
Stop! Greg, come in! Greg! Stop there, Greg!
Although snow is rarely a problem so close to the coast, the wind and rain are a constant drain on the heavily pregnant ewes. Those that the scanning has revealed are carrying 2 or more lambs need to be protected from the elements. They are housed on deep beds of straw and are completely dependent on their shepherd for daily feeding. The arrival of a fresh bale of silage is the high point of the day. The ladies are anxious to be first in the queue for breakfast, undeterred by the prospect of having half a ton dropped on their heads. Swift knows the routine well and makes sure the enthusiastic ewes are kept at a safe distance. As the year turns, the North Devon weather becomes harsher. With frequent gales and prolonged periods of heavy rain, it's a testing time for the sheep. A sudden Atlantic storm has arrived, forecast to last for several days. whilst a mile inland the weather is fairly moderate, on the open Mort Point Peninsula conditions are at their most severe. The flock must be gathered and brought to more sheltered grazing to start their winter feeding. In the early morning gloom, the gather starts on the more sheltered north side of the peninsula. A lone seal has come closer to shore to seek sanctuary from the raging elements. The first flock is pushed in a homeward direction along the coast path. Shepherd and dogs are now half a mile apart. Working on their own to instructions inaudible to the human ear, Greg responds to a distant command telling him to leave the flock that he is working and to collect a further group grazing precariously on a rocky outcrop connected to the mainland by a narrow causeway. A few small groups are grazing on the most exposed locations, protected by their thick winter coats from the howling gale. And as dogs and shepherd round the corner, the full force of the Atlantic elements is all too evident. The bedraggled cormorants take shelter on rocks, having escaped the pounding waves. Greg and Swift work unflinchingly. The extreme weather is of no consequence to their dogged determination. blue sky belies the reality of the gale. It is now gusting to storm force 10. The human voice, when pitched against the raging wind, carries only a few yards. The shepherd's whistle effectively delivers clear and concise commands on which the dogs depend. Greg and Swift each have their own set of whistle commands, allowing them to be worked on individual tasks. After 2 hours of flock gather, crossing of the lane marks the comparative calm and quiet of the sheltered grazing, and the end of an exhausting morning for dogs and shepherd. For Greg and Swift, a warm, straw-filled kennel awaits. For David, a hot bath. March arrives, and with it, the busiest 2 months of the sheep farmer's year. Lambing time involves the whole family in the endless rounds of feeding, moving and tending to the ewes with their newborn lambs. All the imminently expecting ewes are now housed close to the farmhouse, and a 24-hour watch is kept, as up to 80 lambs a day make their way into the world. Over the next 6 weeks, around 1,300 lambs will be born in these sheds. Lambing indoors has obvious advantages. The young lambs are protected from the unpredictable weather and can be closely supervised. However, with so many ewes giving birth in such close proximity, there can be problems with mothers bonding with the wrong offspring, only to neglect their adopted charges a few hours later. To avoid confusion, soon after the birth, a ewe and her lamb will be moved to a small individual pen where they can form the close bond essential to ensure the lamb's health and safety over the next 2 months. Over this period, the youngster will be completely dependent on its mother for survival. The pair will need to be checked several times a day to ensure the lamb is feeding properly. It's a time-consuming process, but an essential one. Just a few hours after its birth, an unfed lamb can become cold and weakened. After a day or two, when the ewes and their offspring are up and thriving, they are moved to a group pen before being taken back out to the fields. Amongst the upheaval of lambing time, there's cause for celebration. Swift's puppies have arrived. The 6 dogs and 2 bitches are all fit and strong. For now, the pups need their mother more than the flock does, and the younger farm dogs will have to take Swift's place. However, the sheepdog's desire to work is ever present. And with the puppies just 10 days old, Swift's interest in her puppies is already being replaced by her desire to return to normal duties. The sound of the tractor signifies that her master needs her help. Maternity leave is suspended, and for a while, the pups are deserted. By the end of March, lambing is in full swing, and reinforcements have arrived. Veterinary students from Bristol University are gaining valuable experience at Borough Farm, helping to load lambs into a trailer for transporting to an open field. The lambs are now 4 days old, and their body weight has increased by half. They are already becoming quick and agile, and are ready to face outdoor life. The lambs travel in the upstairs of the trailer to avoid being squashed. The ewes, meanwhile, having just been separated from their young, are unsettled and suspicious. Greg and Swift will have to stand their ground. To back off now would encourage the ewes to chase the dogs, seeing them as potential predators. Contrary to appearances, a maternal ewe sensing a threat can be a dangerous customer, quite capable of delivering a fatal blow with her head. For its own good and that of the stock, the sheepdog must always remain dominant.
All done?
Greg.
Once at the field, the temptation to gorge on the fresh young grass temporarily overcomes maternal instinct, until the bleat of 40 lost lambs is unleashed. In the ensuing confusion, a mother of twins will often be tempted to make off with only one lamb. Shepherd and dogs work together in a lengthy operation to ensure all ewes and their offspring are suitably matched. With over 1,000 young lambs now at grass, the daily inspection rounds become more prolonged. Travelling on a farm quad bike means that David can inspect the entire stock quickly and with a minimum of disturbance. The bike also carries essential equipment, which means any treatment required can be given without delay. A lamb has an infection in a front knee joint which needs immediate attention, but first it has to be caught. Listening to the whistle, Greg and Swift allow all but the required sheep to drift away and then start to hold the affected lamb with its mother. Teamwork eventually wins the day and the lamb is caught. Because the infection has been discovered early on, it should make a full recovery. It'll need to be treated for the next 4 days, however, so it's clearly marked before being released, ready for the same battle to be fought tomorrow. A few minutes later, a ewe is spotted with an extra lamb. The dogs are familiar with the routine, and soon the lamb is in the trailer and off to find its real mother. Greg's years of shepherding have made him as alert as the shepherd to many of the problems regularly encountered in the fields, and his attention has been drawn to the sound of distressed bleating on the far side of an earth bank. 2 lambs have been exploring and have slipped through a hole in the fence into a neighbour's field. It just takes a little persuasion for the 2 wanderers to rediscover the hole, and they are soon back with their relieved mother.
Greg, away.
Lambing is also in full swing for the coastal flock. The ever-reliable Greg and Swift are constantly at David's side during the rounds, making sure any lost lambs are reunited with the right ewes. At such an early stage in their lives, the youngsters have little fear of the dogs. Greg tries his hardest to turn the odd lamb back to be caught, instinctively using his mouth very gently on the fragile body. An evening inspection round on foot provides an ideal opportunity for junior dog Gail to gain valuable experience. Her 6 months of training hold her in good stead, and she copes well when asked to catch a lame lamb. She's learnt a great deal in the first 13 months of her life. As the lambing season draws to a close, the puppies have changed enormously. No longer completely dependent on their mother Swift, their individual characters are beginning to show. The children have taken on the feeding role, and their interplay is an important part of the pup's social development with humans. Somewhere behind the adorable eyes lies that extra potential that will give one dog the edge in its future working life. But only time will tell which one. By the beginning of May, the lambing rush is over. Borough Farm is at its finest. The wood is in fresh green leaf, and carpets of bluebells add to the magnificent array of colour. The young lambs are growing fast. Hundreds of years ago, their only protection from the wolves that once roamed these woods was to be able to run with the flock within a few hours of birth. Now there are fewer dangers, but their play still reflects the fleetness of foot that would have been needed for survival in a past age. Lambing may be over, but there's still plenty of work for David and his dogs. Worming is an essential task if the sheep are to remain healthy. Modern farming systems whereby large numbers of stock graze in closed fields mean young lambs are particularly vulnerable to stomach worms picked up from the pasture. They haven't yet developed any form of immunity and could become seriously ill or even die if left untreated. Today, one of the more distant flocks is to be driven back to the farm for treatment. It's quite a task, and all the working dogs will have their part to play.
Greg.
Moving a flock of lambs for the first time, particularly on such a long drive home, is no easy job, and it can be sheer weight of dog numbers that wins the day. The younger dogs, Pip and Gale, are held in reserve, whilst the flock is moved at a steady pace, which will help to prevent any old or unfit ewes like this one from breaking away. An out-of-breath sheep will always try to run downhill and pay no heed to a sheepdog. The only way to move her is for the dog to work her gently from a distance. Young lambs too present their own challenges. They will constantly try to double back, and the services of Gale and Pip are enlisted to help prevent a mass breakout. With overwhelming dog numbers today, the job runs smoothly. The last hurdle to be negotiated is a woodland path that divides the farm in half. After 3/4 of an hour, the flock arrives at the handling pens, and the dogs take time to cool off. Working in the close confines of the pens means that Swift must have her wits about her. The ewes are still protecting their young. A snap of the teeth is usually enough to stamp her authority and deter all but the most aggressive customers. Having been allowed to rest, treating the lambs for worms doesn't take long. Whilst they're in the pens, they are also treated to prevent fly strike, the curse of the lowland sheep farmer in the warmer weather. It's a particularly unpleasant condition whereby blowflies, attracted by dirty areas of wool, lay their eggs on the sheep. As soon as the larvae hatch, they begin eating into the skin of the affected animal. The mature ewes, already losing wool from around their necks, are soon to be shorn, but the lambs will definitely need to be treated. Fortunately, a modern spray keeps the flies away for a couple of months, and then the treatment will need to be repeated. One flock completed, another 9 to go. The ewes and their lambs are quickly returned to the peace and quiet of the fields. A few sheep at the farm are kept aside specifically for training purposes. Fern is now 7 months old and her instruction is well underway. Very gradually, she is turning from the unruly hooligan pup of the farmyard into a sheepdog under some sort of control. Greg knows the routine of training young dogs and maintains a circling vigil to stop the sheep escaping from the young apprentice. Fern is learning to keep her distance, to turn squarely from her ewes so as not to unsettle them, and to stop when fully in control, holding the sheep to the shepherd. With such alertness, agility, and turn of speed, it's easy to see why the sheep are so responsive to the young dog. Now there's the most difficult of all commands for Fern to master. That'll do, meaning, come here, work is over. It's the command every young dog dreads.
Stop, Fern.
And for a few moments, the temptation to keep on the far side of the sheep to avoid capture is too strong to ignore.
Stop. 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 Aye. Hello. Stop there, Fern. Aye, 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 aye. Stop. 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 Ah. Stop. Hello, Fern. Ah. Stop. Hello, Fern. Stop. Stop.
But the small wag of the tail is a sign she's ready to concede, and praise is lavished for a successful training session.
Good boy, Greg. That'll do.
Fern is one small step on the way to becoming a skilled member of the working team.
Fern. Hello, Greg. Hello. Greg.
The younger puppies are now 11 weeks old, and both David and the children are on the lookout for a sign that one of them possesses that extra bit of intelligence for the future. First to come to attention is Ernie, so called because of a small umbilical hernia present from birth. Ernie has learnt to jump out of the low puppy run, cross the yard and arrive at the house. He's built up a good relationship with young Nicholas, which seems to be based on brotherly rough and tumble. Ernie is more than keen to join his human family on a trip to feed the children's old pony Copper. In true sheepdog style, however, his attention is soon drawn to a small group of training sheep, and his reaction is plain to see. He is much calmer than Fern was on her first introduction to the ewes. Ernie's behavior holds great promise, and he has effectively chosen himself to be one of the 2 pups to remain at the farm. And all these new experiences have built up quite an appetite. June arrives, and with it, the summer heat. Thick woolen coats, so effective against the winter wind and rain, have now become a burden. The shearing season has been prolonged by weeks of bad weather, but at last a fine forecast means the Mort Point flock can be gathered in. The best time to start the morning gather is sunrise, for in the heat of the day, ewes and lambs will look for shade under the gorse bushes, which cover most of the point and will be that much harder to find. With only the local fishermen to share the glorious June morning, a time like this is one of the true joys of the shepherd's year. As always, local bird life is much in evidence around the point, with cormorant, stonechat and kestrel up bright and early on this summer's day. With 2 miles of unfenced cliffs and considerable distances involved, the experience of the older dogs is much relied upon. Sending them back and out of sight at this distance requires complete trust in the dog's abilities. The ever-present oyster catcher's call competes with the shepherd's whistle, but the dogs are not distracted from their task. Small packets of sheep are slowly joined together. A ewe has followed her lamb down onto the rocks, and although gravity has assisted the descent, they are unable to make the tricky climb back up. Swift is required to help in their retrieval.
Stop.
Her gentle approach and total responsiveness to David's whistle commands is vital on occasions such as these.
Stop there. Stop there. That'll. That'll.
By late morning, the flock has been gathered together, and the final drive up to the pens is underway. The pen is a makeshift affair and the gate too narrow. With Greg and Swift now exhausted, Gail arrives fresh to ensure there is no escape at the last.
Go on, go. Go. Have a drink. Good dogs.
The job is done, and there's a well-earned drink for the dogs whilst the flock is allowed to rest. The sheep are ready to be shorn, and with such a large task ahead, the arrival of extra help is welcomed. David and Jeff work together for a month each year, shearing some 10,000 local sheep between them. In Australia and New Zealand, sheep are shorn in purpose-built sheds. There'll be a dozen or more shearers assisted by twice as many graders, wool rollers and helpers. Here in North Devon, shearing is carried out with a makeshift pen on an uneven spot in the corner of a field. Like lambing, shearing is a family affair. Once home from school, the children too are summoned into action. It's not just the shearing that requires the sweat and toil.
Where is the wool going?
By early August, all the sheep are shorn. The lambs have been treated twice for worms and have been weaned away from their mothers, so they can now enjoy the best grass. The silage and hay have been made, ready to feed next winter. It's one of those rare, quieter times on the farm for shepherd and dogs, and the ideal opportunity to take time out to compete in some local sheepdog trials. Today's event is part of the annual Dunster Show. Trials such as these have been in existence for over 100 years and are intended to be a competitive test for dogs and shepherd, reflecting various aspects of their everyday work, staged in its magnificent setting below the castle. As always, there is plenty to see and do. The variety of animals on show includes the common and not so common.
358, Mrs. Ellison Nash's Rockmore Rooster.
The course is small, but still provides a challenge. Gail has already competed in a couple of trials in her young life, and today she'll be gaining more valuable experience in this unfamiliar environment. The dog is sent on its outrun up the hill to collect the sheep. Which are then brought down the steep bank, through the first set of gates, turned around the handler and away to the left. She takes a wrong command when bringing the sheep around the post and the run is spoiled. For a few moments, control is lost altogether. Passing through a second set of gates, they then turn up the hill and around a bush before being turned back down for a second time. Once more through the gates and back to the shepherd. At this stage, 2 of the sheep are shed off from the rest. And once this has been completed to the judge's satisfaction, the small group is reunited and steered into a small pen.
Stop.
She works quite well, but with the over-exuberance of youth, is reluctant to take her stop commands when away from home. This will need to be corrected if Gail is to have future success on the trials field. Gail puts up a reasonable score for a young dog. Now, it's Swift's turn. At 4.5, she is probably at the peak of her working abilities, and David starts the run with some confidence.
Not the biggest horse, are you?
No, I didn't have any horses in with me. We didn't have any horses in with me.
A couple of extra commands on the way out will cost points on the score, and as the sheep turn around the post, they briefly turn uphill before being set on line towards the gates. Still, the rest of the run goes to plan.
Wow, yes. Yeah, it would have been.
Switch. Stop. Hello, here, switch.
Very hard work.
And there's a successful pen at the end. It's good enough for 6th place on the day. A pleasing result and an enjoyable day out for the family.
Well, if the youngsters would now like to leave the ring, see our show president, Bertram, who's just come out to say hello.
Back on the farm, the recently weaned lambs require further care. Lameness is a common problem with sheep, caused by bacteria on the pasture that thrive in the warm, damp North Devon climate. The bug threat is kept under control by regularly running the flock through a solution-filled barn. But hearing all the commotion in the sheep pen is too much to bear for him. And whether wanted or not, he arrived to give his own special blend of assistance.
Stop, look, back, over, 3 go. Stop there.
Dirty wool has to be regularly trimmed to keep away flies. The lambs aren't the only ones undergoing some restyling. Greg's coat has been clipped back to prevent him overheating in the warm summer weather. However, the real purpose of today's work is to draft off the lambs that have been marked to go to market.
Look back. Look back. Look back. Look back. Look.
Yeah.
Good dogs. County side. Come. Come.
Fern's training sessions have been ongoing throughout the summer, and her potential is now beginning to emerge. The most noticeable improvement is at the start of the training session. She can now be let off her lead without tearing straight off after the sheep.
Away.
She runs in a nice arc and manages to gather the flock in a fairly controlled fashion. At this stage, Fern is also beginning to learn her left and right commands and obeys the stop on most occasions.
Stop.
retained puppy Merc, so called because he's as smooth as a Mercedes, is also undergoing some initial training and is beginning to work freely. When he does, his natural style is plain to see. And if Ernie's keenness can be nurtured into real working ability, he'll make a fine sheepdog too. The swallows gathering on the line, ready for their long migration southwards, are a reminder that the year's brief summer is drawing to a close. The first hints of autumn colours are appearing in the beech trees of Burra Valley. And the bracken of Mort Point will soon die away to its warm shades of gold. It's time to reflect on the successes of the past year. There has been the progress of the young dog Fern. Now gathering and working whole flocks. The birth and development of the promising young pups, Merc and Ernie. And the continuing magic of the partnership between Greg and Swift, excelling in the work to which they were born. Whatever future challenges are thrown up by the elements, and however demanding the circumstances of running a modern sheep farming operation, David knows he will always be able to rely upon his team of border collies. They in turn will continue to live out their days the way their forebears have done for generations, as dogs of the land, devoted to their master and dedicated to their role as tireless sheep herders. For sheep, shepherd and dogs, the farm year will keep on turning in the way it has for centuries. Modern technology has changed much in agricultural practice over the recent years. But one thing is for sure. As long as there are sheep on the hills and in the valleys, There will be border collies to manage and herd them, and shepherds to tend to their needs.
Well, it's been 3 years since we filmed The Year of the Working Sheepdog, and perhaps a good time to give an update on Borough Farm and its dogs. It's been an eventful few years, and not always for the right reasons, but thankfully Borough Farm and its flock survived the foot and mouth year unscathed. A change for the dogs has been a complete new set of kennels, with sofas and armchairs. They seem quite pleased with their new quarters, Ernie in particular. Greg, for so long, has been my constant companion, and he's now nearly 10. If a true comparison is 7 dog years to 1 human year, then he's now in his late 60s, and quite rightly taking things a little easier. He's still as keen as ever to join the daily work, but now he hangs to the back and lets the youngsters take the strain. In the afternoon, he takes rather longer naps than he used to. Swift's now 7, and she hasn't really slowed down at all. Her appetite for work's undiminished, and really she's my top dog now. I rely on her all the time. Perhaps the saddest aspect of the last couple of years for me has been breaking up the working partnership between Greg and Swift. It's Gail who's taken over the other half of the brace partnership. With Greg now in semi-retirement, his partnership with Swift has been broken, even if their friendship's still intact. It's touching that it's still Greg that Swift wants to come to work with. And in the morning, she'll stand at the kennel barking for him to be let out. When working with Greg, the two dogs had their own sides, Greg on the left and Swift on the right. And whatever the situation, they'd always maintain those sides. Greg was always the brains of the partnership, and he'd always compensate for any wayward movements of the sheep. It's taken a long time for Swift to accept Gail as her new working partner. And in the first place, she obviously didn't trust her to take care of her side of the work. Training two dogs to work together can be pretty lengthy. Not only does each dog have to understand its own set of commands, the sheepdog's intelligence will soon allow it to understand its partner's commands. And the temptation to join in can be almost unbearable. Learning to keep to her own side wasn't too much of a problem for Gail. Swift for years had worked with Greg, keeping to the right-hand side all the time. And when working with Gail, that left the left-hand side available, and Gail soon picked up that this was the side she had to work. It's taken over a year to get the two of them working together like this. But for me, the hours and hours of training involved are more than rewarded when I work them out on the open ground at Mort Point and see them working together really well at distances like this. Fern's development hasn't been straightforward. As a youngster, her great style and speed of movement made her stand out to me as a dog of huge potential. She took her whistle commands easily. With those great big prick ears, her hearing was undoubtedly better than most of the other dogs. My hopes were high that as well as being an excellent working dog at home, she'd also be able to compete really well on the trials field. Unfortunately, there was a problem. Fern's always had a slightly sensitive side to her nature, most obvious when I try and put her back in her kennel. And this began to show itself at work. If she was unsure of herself in any way, or unsure of what she was being asked to do, she'd either look for sanctuary in the Land Rover or perhaps on the motorbike, and sometimes she'd even put in a refusal to work at all. In short, the everyday jobs were fine, but if I ever asked her to do something a little bit unusual or something she was unsure of, she might just lay there and refuse to move at all. The problem, I was convinced, was only confidence. You can't really train for confidence, so all I could do was give her plenty of work and reassurance and ask her to do the jobs that she was sure of. But it's still a bit frustrating when you have a dog that you can move 2 paces to the left at half a mile, but you can't even call 10 yards back to you to put in the kennel. In any group of dogs, there's a well-defined hierarchy. In my pack, it's best seen when they're away from work, perhaps running up the drive in front of the quad bike. Each member of the pack will focus on the dog it considers to be its immediate superior, and when at play, this is how they line up. Greg has been the top dog all his adult life, and he'll always look to me as his boss. Second in command is Swift, and she'll always turn her attention to Greg. And Fern, who plays with only Swift. And lastly Ernie sees Fern as his superior. Strangely, Gale's the only dog I've ever had that plays no part in this hierarchy. And then there's Ernie. He won my heart at an early age, and I can't really explain why. In the first place, it was his complete single-minded obsession with sheep, as well as an amazing natural ability. I can't pretend his training's been easy. In fact, it's been far from it. It has been all along and still is hard work. Balance is a term used to describe the dog's desire to hold or balance sheep to the shepherd without allowing them to escape. For Ernie, this instinct's so strong he finds it almost impossible to resist, which in turn makes driving sheep away from me rather difficult for him to master. Commanding him by voice or whistle is often a battle, just to stop him doing what he's determined to do. When I blow a stop command, I often have to blow it 5 times and claim to myself that the first 4 were only warm-ups. He's hugely athletic. It never crosses his mind that he can't clear exactly what's in front of him.
Come by.
And where a flock of sheep are concerned, if he can't go over them, he can always go underneath. Sheepdog's work is a mixture between times when they've got to run flat out, as well as those jobs requiring concentration and subtlety. Ernie possesses the attributes to perform all these tasks. It's just a case of persuading him to perform them when I want him to. But his desire to work's endless, and he's fast becoming my first choice dog when I go to the kennel. Around the farm, Ernie shows a huge devotion to me, which is quite the opposite to what you might expect from a dog who's so obsessed by his sheep work. It's curious how Ernie seems unconcerned about his place at the bottom of the hierarchy, but I'm convinced somewhere in that broad head of his, he's got his path mapped out to one day becoming top dog. It'd be nice to think that one day Fern and Ernie could work together as a brace. And there are just occasions when it looks like it might be possible. But in truth, I don't think Ernie's ever going to be a team player. As last winter passed, I began to think that Fern was perhaps overcoming her problems of confidence. There's no particular cure, just time and allowing her to perform more and more tasks that she felt confident of doing. And at last, the ability that I always believed she'd had is showing through. And recently she won her first sheepdog trial. The sheep farming side of things might carry on with little change, but the children are a different matter. It only seems 5 minutes since Nick was rolling about on the floor with Ernie when he was a pup. Claire's got a new pony. Laura's busy looking after some ducks that she's just hatched out. The satisfaction I get from working with sheep and sheepdogs and bringing up a young family in the beauty of the North Devon countryside remains undiminished. Because after all, it's not a bad way to make a living. Go on, you two. Greg.